I serve as the ranking minority member on the Senate Elections Committee. I'll make some brief comments, and then Senator Qaddoura will make some brief comments, and then Leader Taylor will back clean up for us and provide his take on everything. First of all, thank you so much for coming to our media avail. What we've seen throughout this redistricting process is that across the Hoosier State from the census is that Indiana is becoming more diverse as a state. We've also seen that more and more Hoosiers are leaving rural Indiana and landing in urban, suburban areas, particularly around Indy and Marion County. Today on the Senate floor, I talked about the process and how it could have been a little bit more better, a little bit more open, a little bit more transparent for Hoosiers. I also talked about how the maps were created and how they really just don't reflect Indiana. And sure, it may meet the legal requirements as mentioned by my colleague Senator Cook, but the public was asking for so much more. They were asking for compactness. They were asking for the maps to be competitive and to keep communities of interest together, which, by the way, is what my colleague Senator Cook mentioned was a priority for the Republican caucus. But as we saw on Thursday, in the attempt from our caucus to make the case was that Fort Wayne and Evansville and Marion County and the West Lafayette districts were not kept as interests of communities of interest. To be honest with you, I felt like this process was standing in the middle of train tracks as a speeding freight train was heading our way. And I certainly want to say I'm so proud of our caucus members for not giving up. We knew the outcome of this, being outnumbered by the votes, but we gave it our all. We felt like we gave a good presentation of how the maps could have been. We pointed out areas of interest that could have been fixed, and we heard and listened to Hoosiers in this process. And that's the solace that I take away from this process, is that I, as our ranking minority member, this was my top priority these past couple of weeks. I haven't even begun to thought about my bills for the 2022 session yet, but we wanted to make sure we got through this process and that we were giving this our full attention. And that's what I take away from this, is knowing that I did my very best to fight for my constituents and for the Hoosiers that across who particularly came out from the field hearings in the northern part, the field hearings in the southern part, to the field hearing in Indianapolis, to the two hearings in the House, and then the hearing that was here in the Senate. And so I feel good about what we have done. I'm disappointed in the final vote count today, but I will stop there and let my other colleagues give their talks or their comments. Senator Qaddoura.
Thank you, Senator Ford. Fady Qaddoura, F-A-D-Y, last name Qaddoura, Q-A-D-D-O-U-R-A, State Senate District 30. Thank you, Senator Ford, Leader Taylor. This last session, I introduced the Independent Redistricting Commission bill because I firmly believe that citizens in a democracy are in charge of driving what kind of government they want to see and the representation that they want to have. Across the state of Indiana, many communities have expressed their displeasure with the fact that Indiana's government is not representative of the many communities across the state of Indiana. So while we tried as a chamber to promote certain standards, as Senator Ford indicated, including compactness and not breaking political lines of cities, counties, and townships, I think we failed. The current maps fail to basically ensure that our elections are competitive and that our elections are fair. And I raised a rhetorical question during committee and on the Senate floor asking if the drawing of the maps will predetermine the outcome of the elections for the next 10 years, then can we still call it a democracy? And I can't in good faith say, even though we have the optics of a democracy, I can't in good faith say that under one party rule in the state of Indiana that we are exercising our democratic principles. One of the citizens and representative of other organizations, Julia Vaughn, the policy director of Common Cause, described it eloquently and well in one single sentence when she described the conflict of interest between or that exists or arises when legislators and politicians draw their own maps. And I quote, she said, "It's like hiring an arsonist to basically be the fire marshal." And that's a very clear conflict of interest. It's human nature that people want to preserve their political power, elected officials and politicians, and it's very difficult for any elected official to advocate against their own personal interest. And that's why I fiercely advocated for an independent redistricting commission that places the power of drawing these maps in the hands of our citizens. That commission was supported in the past by Republicans and Democrats. I remember when the Republicans were in the minority on the House side, under Minority Leader Speaker, and then afterwards was Speaker Bosma, they advanced and they promoted an independent redistricting commission. I was very proud that Senator Grooms, who was a Republican, crossed party lines and voted in support of my amendment in committee, and today we saw on the floor that he supported, or he opposed the bill in support of our position that these are not fair maps. I think to conclude, one of the things that I'm very concerned about is not just the immediate outcome of today's legislation, but looking forward over the many next decades, these types of measures and policies will erode our democracy in so many ways, including in an economic and fiscal way. We heard across the state that millennials and Gen Z are no longer interested in working in Indiana under policies that seems to be extreme. They are, if once they leave, many of them don't come back, and we call that the brain drain problem in Indiana. Many of these young Hoosiers, they feel that their government is not representative of who they are, and they made it very loud and clear that unless you reform your policies, then we're packing and going somewhere else. And that's my message to especially our business community. Many of my Republican friends always claim that we don't pick winners and losers in our capitalistic society, and I question, isn't our democracy as important as our economic system, that we need not to pick winners and losers? Isn't it important that we preserve and protect our democratic institutions so that our kids and grandkids can grow up in a society by which they can compete based on healthy policy ideas? And finally, I'm extremely concerned that these gerrymandered maps will only lead to the election of elected officials who have to appeal to the most extreme elements of our society, and thus, when they come to the General Assembly, they have to only introduce extreme legislation to go back home to these districts and say, you know, we fulfilled our promises. And that's what happens when we remove competition in our elections, and it becomes less fair and less competitive. I intend, as long as I serve in the Indiana State Senate, every single session until this gets done, or until the voters decide that I'm not the right person to serve them, I intend to always introduce my independent redistricting commission bill. I will modify it, I will improve it, I will cultivate support from my Republican friends, but this is my mission, and we're gonna, with the help of Senator Ford as our ranking minority member, Senator Greg Taylor, and many others, we're gonna hopefully get it done, if not today, tomorrow, if not tomorrow, next year, if not next year, next decade, but we are determined and we will continue to work on that.
So, Greg Taylor, G-R-E-G-T-A-Y-L-O-R. What we saw today was something that this country has seen for the last few years, and that was a polarization of people and their ideas. What the legislation that was passed today that had to do with the passing of the maps for not only the House, the Senate, but Congress as well, was an example of how this country, as well as this state, has become polarized. And what really disturbed me about these maps was the deliberate dilution of the minority vote. And I call it deliberate because they said they deliberately used extra representation to justify splitting up communities of color. And you have to ask yourself sometimes when you see these things, especially someone like me who lives in communities like this, how long is it before the people take umbrage of what has happened. And I don't think it's going to take too long for the citizens of Fort Wayne, Evansville, Indianapolis, those areas that our largest populations have become bifurcated by purposeful legislative map drawing. And we have to be careful of that, because now, according to the Senator Cook, who drew the maps, they have more representation. Well, I can tell you from experience with this more representation idea that Indianapolis has seen more legislation from the other side of the aisle to undo what the locals do than I've ever seen before. So that whole concept of more representation doesn't fit the bill that Senator Cook was putting forward, and that's very disturbing to me. So we're open to any questions you guys might have.
Deliberate dilution of minority representation. That sounds like a textbook Voting Rights Act lawsuit. Do you see a Voting Rights Act violation?
This is a good question. I can't tell you what is going to happen. I think we're going to be doing a lot of analyzing of those districts that they did split the minority population. You know, the Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act is a very difficult burden to overcome, because the minority groups, you have to show the propensity for that minority group to actually vote a certain way. That's going to be something that we have to look at in the future to determine whether or not there will be any legal action. But I know that there are people who are looking at that right now.
When you're looking at the overall state, it sounds like it's really impacting the whole state. You mentioned Evansville, Fort Wayne. Who is mostly impacted here? Any other cities that we should be mentioning?
West Lafayette, Indianapolis. I mean, listen, I can't emphasize it more. We gave them maps that had little bubbles on them that showed the minority population. And if you look at those maps, you will see deliberate dilution. For example, in Evansville, they took the most densely populated minority population and split it between two Senate districts. In Fort Wayne, they not only took the minority populated district, but one of the council districts that is represented by the only district elected minority was broken into 3 parts. It's clear that the locals have a minority representation, and they split it. And what's ironic about the splitting and the deliberate, according to Senator Cook, we wanted more representation. Their colleagues in the House did the very opposite. They actually lessened the representation of the representatives in the House of Representatives. So which one is it? One of them is either, the bottom line is it's all political. And all we ask for is for them to say that. And of course, that's not going to happen. Although Senator Cook did admit that there was no consideration of competition in drawing the maps. So he didn't care that Hoosiers have someone to compete, to have competitive races so that they could have someone to have a choice to vote for.
You mentioned independent, someone coming in. If roles were reversed, would you do as they did?
That's always the thing. Well, if you were in power, you would do this. This state has never had, one time in over 40 years has this state had Democrat control of the Senate. The House has gone back and forth, but not the Senate. No, I wouldn't. And I can say that with a clear conscience, because the maps that we offered, that the Senate offered, which was from the independent commission, had myself and Senator Bro in the same district. So one of us would have had to make a decision had the maps that we proposed from the independent commission, but that's what they came up with, that's what we submitted. And I still voted for a piece of legislation that put me and my colleague in the same district.
Speaking of which, Senator Tallien announced her retirement yesterday. Anybody else that you know of who's not going to run again next year?
I do not have any information on the terms of our members. Senator Tallien he's always going to be one of the best senators in the state, let alone this country. And I keep saying this. I've seen. I mean, her due diligence, her intelligence, the arguments she makes on the floor are just outstanding. And she was the catalyst and continues to be the catalyst for women's rights. So we're going to continue down the path, and hopefully someone who will take her place will be just as great a senator as she was. But I don't have any information on that.
May I add that to that? I also just, as the caucus chair, want to extend my deep gratitude to Senator Tallien for her service to the state, particularly to our caucus. One of my fondest memories of her, anytime there's a bill that needs a little bit more clarification, she would run over to the bookcase and grab the code and flip the pages, and she would know exactly where to be. As Senator Taylor mentioned, it will be a huge crater, frankly, for our state that she won't be here. I wish her the very best in whatever her next endeavor is. I hope that she has a vacation planned. She definitely deserves it.
Let me ask you about two members in particular. Senator Randolph basically said goodbye to Senator McNabb, who were from the same district. Do you know whether one or the other of them is not going to run?
You know, it would definitely be premature for me to talk about whether or not they're both going to be here until we see that the maps have actually passed. So I haven't had the time, nor have I, and with all due respect, we didn't have the legislation, so I have not spoken to either of them about what their concept. And I know he said something to Senator Mervan on the floor, but I don't think it's indicative of what they've talked about or whatever.
The other one, Senator, I've asked you before, are you running for re-election next year?
Well, as I mentioned, gave this process 100% of my full attention. I wanted to make sure that we were listening to Senate District 29 constituents as well as Hoosiers across the state. I myself have a little small vacation planned. I'm going to circle up with friends and family, my kitchen table folks, if you will, and we'll make the best decision in the next couple of weeks. So be looking for that. But right now, I'm just looking forward to a little downtime.
As far as like the last 10 years, in 2011, Republicans, they had the majority then, right? So how is this, what happened here, this proposal much different than 10 years ago?
Well, clearly, from the dilution of the minority vote, they did it last time, but this one was just even more egregious. And they had to do that because one thing that they can't control is the demographic shifts. When you have dense populations in urban core, you have a choice to make. Do you separate them and create their own districts, which could have been done, not only in Fort Wayne, but in Evansville as well? Or do you dilute the vote to keep down their ability to vote as a pool? For example, in Marion County, you will see the southern districts that are currently held by the Republicans now stretch into Johnson County. Could have clearly left those districts in Marion County so communities of interest will be represented. But instead, they take an entire district from another county in southern Indiana and plop it in the center part of Marion County in order to allow those southern districts to stretch into Johnson County. That's clear. I mean, if you just took, frankly, Senator Freeman's district, took the little finger that comes into Marion County, given it to Senator Freeman, you could have kept his district in Marion County. But what you do is you dilute the vote, so you keep that finger, make it bigger, it's a knuckle now if you want to call it, and then you take Senator Freeman's district, make it stronger Republican by moving it into a more conservative county like Johnson County. Same thing they did with Senator Sandlin. They don't want to spend $1 million defending these guys anymore. It's better to just go ahead and give the Democrats another seat in downtown Indianapolis that potentially could trend their way instead of making it challengeable for the two districts in Southern and Indianapolis challengeable. So those are clear distinctions to what they did last time because they had to. And then the deliberate District 1 up in Lake County, that was not appropriate. I mean, not one, that they shouldn't have done that either.
And when did you guys, did you get the proposal and how long did you have to look it over before today?
Yeah, so we found out much like the public found out, and that was when the Senate Republicans released their maps on that Tuesday. So, so when I tell you that we were hunkered down, analyzing the map and seeing what we can do, it was nonstop for us. And so we really did not have a lot of time to really analyze the map. And so, like I said, yesterday our arguments, with the different cities were based off of only about 5 or 6 days of trying to really understand how this is going to impact people for the next 10 years. And this is what I'm talking about when we talk about transparency. This is what I'm talking about, how the process needs to be open. And I think it's a little disingenuous for my colleagues to say that they've involved us in the process, because we found out much when the public did.
This was last Tuesday?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, when the Senate Republicans and Senator Ford, the other Senator Ford unveiled the maps to the public, that's when we also saw those maps as well. And and I personally think that the shapefile that is the kind of the behind the scenes where you get to kind of plug it in with all of the data. It should have been given to us immediately, as opposed to us having to ask for that shapefile. I understand my House friends also had to wait, a pretty extensive period of time to receive that shapefile. Without that shapefile, we really can't do much when it comes to looking at the map and analyzing it. Now, we were trying to plug in manually the numbers and things of that nature to kind of, because we didn't have the shapefile, to kind of understand what's going on with the maps as soon as we saw the unveiling of the maps. So again, this is what I'm talking about when we talk about working together and being transparent.
No.
Hope you're all getting a vacation.
Yes.
Thank you
You
very
too.
much,
Appreciate you.
gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Take care of yourself.
You too.
Thanks, but mine was last week. I missed the house hearings.
Really?